copies to the media. I hope you have registered for you to get on September 13, 2022, Dr. William Ruto was sworn in as the 50th President of the Republic of Kenya. President Ruto assumed office with a solemn pledge to enhance the recognition, promotion, and enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all Kenyans. 1 year later, we gather here on September 14, 2023 to commemorate the first anniversary of President Ruto's tenure, an opportunity to reflect upon the journey our nation has traveled under his leadership. One of the ways citizens measure government performance is through shining a light on the promises made in the party manifesto and policy pronouncements. We shall therefore dwell on how this government has performed against its initial promises. The key question being, to what extent has this government fulfilled its promises? In doing so, we shall focus on the pledges on governance with a specific focus on fundamental rights and administration of justice.
We shall continue on the progress in the following areas as we commemorate this first year of Kenya Kwanza government. 1, the appointment of a senior pathologist is indeed a positive development, indicating a commitment to improving the investigation of reportable deaths. However, the full implementation of the Coroner's General Office is imperative. The completion of the human resources instruments in readiness for appointment of the Coroner's General is still imperative. The government's commitment to resolving all judgments and orders against it within a 60-day time frame is certainly commendable, such as the appointment of Court of Appeal judges and facilitating the return of Miguna. The disbandment of the Special Service Unit SSU marked a significant step in the right direction. The establishment of a task force on police and prison reforms under the capable leadership of retired Chief Justice David Maraga Emeritus represented a promising stride towards creating a dignified work environment for our law enforcement officers. Also, in a parallel move aimed at achieving financial independence for the National Police Service, the appointment of a Principal Administrative Secretary, PAS, as the accounting officer was a pivotal step in the right direction. This appointment aimed to ensure that the police could operate autonomously, free from undue influence from the President's office.
The data from our daily monitoring in the last 12 months demonstrate that the government has performed dismally with regard to democratic policing and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Indeed, the freedom of assembly, association, expression, and media freedom has faced unprecedented threats. In the past year, we have witnessed a wave of punitive policing during protests, extrajudicial executions, deaths in custody, deliberate torture of children, interference with investigative authorities, unconstitutional interference with the National Police Service, and other critical human rights violations. As you are aware, the current government promised to end police abuse, especially against urban youth, through enhancing police oversight and creating an ombudsman to monitor human rights violations. We are sad to report that there has been no change in this direction. To achieve this particular promise, the current government committed to ending extrajudicial executions, enforced disappearances, and enhancing police oversight through bodies like IPOA and the National Police Service Commission. Unfortunately, our data reveals a troubling trend from October 2022
to August 31st, 2023. In this period, we documented unprecedented 482 cases of torture and other violations, including extrajudicial executions and forced disappearances. And these cases are more than double the cases documented in a similar period in between October 2021 and September 2022. As I mentioned, this marks a staggering increase of 250 cases compared to 232 cases reported in a similar period between 2021 and 2022. Out of these cases, out of these 482 cases, 351 were torture, inhumane, degrading treatment or punishment, and 128 cases were extrajudicial executions, and 3 were enforced disappearances. Shockingly, the majority of victims, all survivors, were young male adults between the age of 18 and 35 years, accounting for 314 cases out of 482. While those aged between 36 and 65 years were 121, and those under 18 were 44. Majority of these cases at 415 were male and 67 were female. This increase in cases of torture and other violations from 232 in the previous period to 482 between October last year and now indicate a failure to curb police abuse of power, including excessive, unnecessary, illegal, and disproportionate use of force and firearms. This alarming rise not only shows a lack of progress, but also suggests the situation has worsened. Furthermore, the fact that majority of victims and survivors are young adults aged between 18 and 35 years, accounting for 65%, is particularly troubling because the promise by this government was to take care of the youth of this country. President Ruto's promise was aimed at protecting urban youth from police abuse, yet they continue to be disproportionately affected by these violations. The data we have implies that the president's efforts to address police abuse and protect urban youth has fallen short, as evidenced by the increase in these cases and the demographic profile of the victims. This situation calls for a critical evaluation of the strategies and measures put in place to fulfill the promises made regarding police reform and the protection of youth.
In the same vein, for dismal performance, we'll speak about accountability, independence, and oversight. IPOA's financial structuring and resources have not been prioritized during the Kenya Kwanza administration, undermining its effectiveness in accountability and justice for victims. The promised ombudsman to monitor human rights violation has not been appointed, and cases of abuse have escalated, particularly during public order management. Expressions and statements that commend law enforcement violations and issuance of shoot-to-kill orders already worsen a critical situation. The contradictory rhetoric surrounding police reforms amplifies violations and confuses the nation's progress on accountability. Chances of accountability have dimmed as a result of police refusal to record complaints from victims of police abuse and failure to report all injuries and deaths to IPOA as required by the law ensures that we do not investigate as we should. The denial of occurrence book numbers, P3 forms, and the lack of investigation into police misconduct contribute to a lack of accountability and impunity. Establishing a special tribunal for gross human rights violations and enforced disappearance, as promised by the KK government,
based on their manifesto, these are our comments. The disbandment of the Special Service Unit marked a significant step in the right direction. However, it is disheartening to take note that cases against its members have not been advanced as expected, particularly in the wake of the resurgence of similar units during protests, who we call Men in Black. This raises serious concerns about accountability and the efficiency, or rather the efficacy, of the measures taken. Furthermore, the decision to transfer the responsibility for addressing enforced disappearances back to the Independent Policing Oversight Authority is a disappointing move. While IPOA plays a pivotal role in police oversight, its mandate does not extend to covering all perpetrators, including those from military, Kenya Forest Service, and Kenya Wildlife Service, especially where the latter are not operating under the police command. This limitation in its jurisdiction undermines its ability to comprehensively address enforced disappearances and other gross human rights violations perpetrated by various agencies. The retreat by the President is indeed a betrayal of his promise to deal decisively with these malaise. On ensuring compliance with court rulings, we state as follows. The government's commitment to adhering to all judgments and court orders against it within 60 days is certainly commendable. Yet, despite some notable progress, such as the appointment of the Court of Appeal judges and facilitating the return of Miguna, there are critical areas where significant action is still needed. The non-operationalization of key legislations, namely the Public Benefits Organization Act, the establishment of the County Policing Authority, remains a source of concern. These legislative measures are essential for enhancing governance and accountability at both national and local levels, and enabling the not-for-profit to be more effective in serving the nation's development agenda. Equally troubling are instances of government disregard to court rulings, exemplified by the implementation of fuel prices under IPRA, despite existing judgments. Such actions undermine the rule of law and erode confidence in the justice system. On granting financial independence of the police, this is our considered opinion, the establishment of the Task Force on Police and Reforms under the capable leadership of the retired Justice David Maraga represented a promising stride towards creating a dignified work environment for our law enforcement officers. However, it is disheartening to note that despite its appointment 9 months ago, the task force has yet to deliver its much anticipated report. This delay leaves a critical reform efforts hanging in the balance. Also, in a parallel move aimed at achieving financial independence for the National Police Service, the appointment of the Principal Administrative Secretary, the PAS, as accounting officer was a pivotal step in the right direction. This appointment aimed to ensure that the police could operate autonomously, free from undue influence from the President's office. In conclusion, the aforementioned findings highlight substantial deficiencies in fulfilling governance and human rights commitment as laid out in the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto launched on July 1st in 2020. We demand that the President prioritizes the protection and enjoyment of fundamental human rights and freedoms. Freedom from torture and related violations is not a privilege, but an inherent right that must serve as a guiding principle for all governance endeavors.
We call upon the President to, 1, recognize and support investigative and oversight institutions, including the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights and IPOA. 2, we call the President to establish the Coroner General's Office, which plays a pivotal role in independency, investigating reportable deaths to ensure a fair and thorough investigation. 3, establish a special tribunal to investigate and adjudicate cases of gross human rights violations, including extrajudicial executions, enforced disappearances, torture, and inhumane treatment. 4, ratify and domesticate the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. 5, operationalize the PBO Act and the county policing authorities to facilitate effective participation of citizens and non-profit sector in development and security governance. 6, we call the President to enhance opportunities for reparations for victims of violations by establishing the Victim Protection Fund. Mr. President, we ask you to put in place constitutional and statutory provisions to ensure the financial independence of the National Police Service. Finally, Mr. President, expedite the delivery of the report of the Maraga Task Force on police and prisons reforms for renewed momentum in police and penal reforms. To the victims and the survivors and your families of human rights violations, we extend our deepest sympathies and unwavering support. Your courage in the face of adversity inspires us to advocate tirelessly for justice and reform. We believe in a future where the rule of law prevails and every citizen can live free from fear and oppression. Together, we will continue to raise our voices, demand accountability, reparations, and work tirelessly to ensure that justice is not just a hope, but a reality. To the government, you must take immediate, decisive action to end torture. In light of the statistics which you have mentioned, we foresee a resurgence of the dark days when torture were employed as a tool for repression, oppression, and infringement of fundamental freedoms.
The story is the same. It's a story of the suffering, if you want to call the suffering of the hustlers, if you want to call. For me, it's a derogatory word, so I don't use it, but that's what has been used by this particular government, that the people they swore to protect, the poor urban youth, have been the major victims of state violence in the last 12 months, and the numbers have doubled as compared to the previous 12 months before they took over in September. That's the message we want to, and we are saying that accountability is dimming. Why? Because of the pronouncements by the top government leaders, including the president, commending the police for a job well done. Yet, we are saying 128 people have died in the hands of this government, mainly by the officers of the National Police Service. The highest number of deaths ever in the last 10 years that IMLU has been monitoring police conduct. The highest number ever at 128. At 482, combination of torture, dehumanizing treatment, extrajudicial executions, and forced disappearances. The number 482 is the highest number ever we have ever recorded in an 8-month period. People, numbers matter. Numbers don't lie. And so for us, it's not politics. We are saying the Constitution demands under Chapter 4 that we protect the rights of all. And a government that respects the claims to respect the rule of law. There are people who have, as you have seen the figures, the exercise of the freedom of assembly, association, expression, the way the government treated those who are exercising those freedoms escalated the numbers, because the default mode of policing under this government has been use of force, excessive use of force, and firearms. It has been a punitive approach to policing, which is contrary to the Constitution of Kenya and the National Police Service Act. The police are not there to punish. The police are there to keep the law. Punishment is not part of the law. It is on record that all the numbers we have here, all those people, none of them has been arrested by the police as a suspect of any crime. And therefore, the killing that happened in the last 1 year, the maiming that happened, including of children, was not to keep the law, was not to effect an arrest as required, because the police are allowed by law to use the necessary force to enforce an arrest, is it? To effect an arrest. None of these people, including those 2 young people who died in Kisumu in ICU after being bludgeoned on the head, pulled out of their house in Nyalenda to the street, and their heads bludgeoned, rendered unconscious, ended up in ICU, never woke up. Would you tell me that that is enforcing the law? Pulling people out of their houses? That to us is nothing else but state terror, akin to what we saw in the 90s in this country. And there are many here who witnessed that terror. And we are very concerned that that is a clear indication we might be headed back to the dark old days. And that's why we come here to speak. And we don't come here to speak alone. We come here to speak also with those who have suffered. There are a few here who have gathered the courage. You'll be free to speak to them and hear from them what they've gone through. We have one family with a child who suffered from tear gas thrown into their house, into their compound. Is that law enforcement? Was that child demonstrating? Because now you say that being opposition is criminal. So was that child a criminal? Was the child demonstrating? Why would you throw tear gas into somebody's house where children are domiciled? So those are the questions we're asking ourselves, and those questions trouble us. It gets very emotional when you look at the manner of injuries. So that's, I just want to make 2 other comments, then you open up for question and answer. In the first 3 months of this government, in last year, we recorded the highest ever number of violations in Q4 of 2022 as compared to the 3 quarters of 2022. So to us, it's not about maandamano, it's the way the government has decided to conduct its affairs with regard to security and safeguarding human rights. And you'll see the numbers when you get to the report. Sorry? What do you want? Yes. If you have a suggestion, go ahead.